loved about Joe through the primary and here and the vice president, rather, through this process is his tone and tenor was different from the president's, and he struck a period of time that, again, we could differ on issues without being difficult with each other. And I think he will constantly adjust and move towards that safe space that has been his ace in the hole from the primary to the general election to this. And they're going to make adjustments to make sure they're never offside, out of bounds on that effort. And they can never be called, for a 5-yard penalty here. That's where this can flip quickly on you, and they're going to be stay within the lines and always draw in the lines.
We've just heard from Eric Trump as well on the tweet. Real Donald Trump is a true warrior who will fight through this with the same strength and conviction that he uses to fight for America each and every day. I ask you to join me in praying for his recovery. I've never been more proud of someone and what they have had to endure. We are coming up now on 6 o'clock in the east. What you're seeing there right there is Marine One at the White House preparing to take President Trump to Walter Reed Medical Center there on the right side. As we know, at 12:54 this morning, the president announced that he had tested positive for COVID. We learned this morning from the White House Chief of Staff that the president had mild symptoms, but over the course of the afternoon, the situation appears to have become somewhat more serious. The president reported to have a fever, chills, and a cough, the classic symptoms of COVID. Also reported to be taking an experimental drug from Regeneron, an 8-gram dose of an antibody cocktail, the White House saying it's a precautionary measure. And now the president preparing to go to Walter Reed Medical Center, perhaps for a few days. Jen Ashton, talk about the course of the president's illness so far and what we can expect over the next few days.
Well, I think the thing, George, is that this virus has shown us that we really can't predict very much. No one has a crystal ball here. We are talking about someone in their 70s, with fever and chills. I can tell you when I have fever and chills, I don't know that I could make a 50-yard walk by myself to a helicopter, and obviously I'm not 74. So I think that every patient is different. We have to understand that this virus can be really unpleasant. We've heard many, many reports about that from everyone from Boris Johnson to the average person. And until it's in the rearview mirror, you really don't know what to expect in medicine. So I think that the treatment will be based on observation. There will be some aggressive measures taken, but also by the same token, some expectant and conservative measures in a hospital setting. So it's a very fine balance, and it's certainly not robotic or cookie cutter or one size fits all in nature.
One of the finest hospitals in the world, Walter Reed Medical Center. Rachel Scott is there on the scene. And can you detect any unusual activity yet, Rachel?
Not yet, George, but we are seeing people starting to arrive behind me as we await the president's arrival here at Walter Reed Medical Center. And this is just a stunning turn of events less than 24 hours after the president revealed that he has tested positive for COVID-19. He is now expected to spend a few days here at Walter Reed Medical Center. Now, the White House press secretary says the president will continue working out of presidential offices. Multiple officials tell us that he is expected to be receiving tests every single day. And the president, while in self-isolation, has been working throughout the day, but he is experiencing those mild symptoms, a low-grade fever, we are told, chills and congestion. Earlier today, he did speak to Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, who said he was in good spirits, George.
Thank you, Rachel. I want to bring in our White House producer, John Santucci. John, you've had the chance to speak with Don Jr., the president's son?
I did, Trump. I did, George. I just hung up with the president's eldest son, Donald Trump Jr. He told me he spoke to his father earlier this morning, describing the 74-year-old as in a good mood, pretty upbeat, but said he did sound a little tired when they spoke this morning, as he quickly turned the conversation to how things were out in the campaign trail. The president's eldest son telling me that he's never seen his father sick in 42 years and is hoping he's going to get back on the road soon. But obviously asking everyone to please keep his father in his thoughts.
And so we've heard from Don Jr. We saw that tweet from Eric Trump. We should probably also note that over the last now more than 5 years, Hope Hicks has really become part of the Trump family as well.
Oh, no doubt, George. She is the adopted child of the Trump family. The president himself often refers to her as Hopi, and someone that, for so long has been in tow with the first family. Her office, up until she departed the White House in 2018, was the closest one to the Oval Office, just outside the president's door. And when she returned this year, many aides in the West Wing and family members of the president actually welcomed it as someone that had the president's trust, loyalty, and his brain. And the secret weapon of Hope, as multiple sources have told me over the years, is that she's the only one that could tell him bad news, which is obviously a very tough task for anybody in the White House, and definitely a tough task for anyone that's been in the White House this year.
What do we know about how she's doing?
So, George, I've spoken to multiple sources that have talked to Hope within the last day. I'm told she's doing okay. She is exhibiting symptoms of the coronavirus. She has been resting at home. George, most of the White House aides that travel with the president are tested before they hit the road, and that's exactly what happened to Hope Hicks on Wednesday morning. She had joined the president on his trip to Minnesota. She had passed her COVID test. It came back as negative. And then as she was in the air with the president heading towards Minnesota, I'm told by sources that she started to feel ill, started to exhibit symptoms, and that's when she was actually said she should quarantine on board the plane, and that's what she did. I'm told that things, unfortunately for Hope, did get a little worse after that. But she is at home, she is resting, and she is, hoping to make a speedy recovery. Okay,
John, thanks very much. Go do some more reporting now and come back when you've got it. I want to bring in Mary Jordan, who's just written a book on Melania Trump, The Art of the Deal. And Mary, Melania Trump also tested positive, that we learned that last night, has symptoms perhaps not quite as severe yet as her husband. And of course, they've also got to be concerned about their son, Barron, who's been living in the White House.
And also her parents. There perhaps is nobody more close to Melania than her elderly parents. And she has actually been caring for her mother, who was sick. So, there's a lot of concern for a very, very close family, the closest people on earth to Melania Trump, and she eats dinner and lunch and breakfast.
I think we lost Mary Jordan there again. Let me bring Matthew Dowd back in right now, Matt. As we see the White House, a crisp autumn day, Friday afternoon at the White House right now, waiting for the president to come out to Marine One. It's hard to imagine more of a surprise coming in the final weeks of a presidential campaign.
We're all been used to, you and I, all of us have covered campaigns for so long, we're always used to the October surprise, but we've never been used to this kind of October surprise. This goes beyond any kind of surprise that we've seen. And one thing I'll say is I'm willing to bet my Texas land that the president walks out under his own volition on this, because I think he understands, as Ram was saying, he understands what that means if he doesn't. And how much that is important to him. So my guess is he's going to do that. So this is a surprise like any, George. There's all kind of questions that it raises as voting starts in the midst of this. As we talked about his campaign, what the Biden campaign does. We haven't talked about it enough, but Vice President Pence, who's been in contact with Donald Trump, what does he do in the midst of this when the president is going to the hospital? He's on the campaign ticket with the president. He was in contact with the president. What does he need to do in the midst of this? Does he not campaign? Does he not go out? So that's a whole other question.
Well, and let's try to at least try to answer some of them. I mean, the president, as you had pointed out, was coming into this week behind, a pretty stable 7-point lead for Joe Biden over the last several weeks and months. Nothing seemed to shake that. This brings the coronavirus front and center once again. Can the White House and the Trump team even mount a campaign at this point?
I don't think they can, actually. I don't think they can mount anywhere close to the campaign they thought about. But I think this is an entirely new territory for them, which may be actually good for them, because the campaign they were mounting wasn't working. The convention they held didn't move the numbers. The debate strategy they had didn't change the dynamics. So maybe not running any campaign is their best route to this, in any kind of scenario. But I think the problem the president has, and was mentioned earlier, is for somebody that has tried to discount coronavirus, that's kind of downplayed, according to his own words, that has made fun of Joe Biden and made fun of people for wearing masks, for all his staff, little of who wear masks, to have the events that he has, for him now to be going to Walter Reed Hospital with coronavirus, I think puts a huge, huge dent into anything that they wanted to possibly say in the last 30 days.
Yeah, and Terry Moran, we were talking about Boris Johnson, British Prime Minister, earlier. He actually got a wave of sympathy in the wake of his hospitalization with COVID earlier this year. But the president is facing a much different situation, in part because for the reasons that Matt just mentioned, in part because he is right in the middle of a presidential campaign right now.
He is, when feelings run very, very high. Of course, everyone will want to unite and hope and pray for his speedy recovery. And if he does, when he does recover, there could very well be a rallying among his base and a new argument for him. Look, I beat it. We can do it, too. He'd need to modify, I think, some of the language that he's used around masks and other issues. But I've talked today with David Bossie, who was former deputy campaign manager of the Trump campaign, still very close to the president, saw him over the weekend. And he said that a campaign can go back to what they were doing during lockdown, that they did have the president on the phone, holding kind of virtual rallies on the phone. Certainly not the same thing as the Trump show in a real rally. But in also talking to voters in Ohio, Michigan, Pennsylvania, places I've been over the past few months, it sounded to me that the Trump supporters were willing to cut him some slack, as many voters are, about the original emergence of this pandemic. They saw it as an act of God. And now that he is afflicted with it, the question is, will that forgiveness, as it were, that understanding that I heard talking to voters, continue this deep into it?
In a deeply divided nation. Cecilia Vega, I guess one of the other quandaries for the president and his team is that it seemed like in recent days and weeks that since the convention, at least, the president and their team's entire strategy was to try to take down Joe Biden. That's what we saw at the debate the other night. Tough to do that when you're in the hospital, when the country's facing this health crisis.
Yeah, and George wanted to do that takedown at these kind of mega in-person rallies that we were seeing the president do, including, frankly, in some of these hot zones. The president had been planning to hold 2 rallies this weekend in Wisconsin. That's in spite of the fact that the coronavirus task force had called this state a red zone because of the high infection rate and these rising numbers that we're seeing there. And, with the polls that you just mentioned in this widening gap between Trump and Biden, they were really hoping to try to close that gap in these final weeks of this campaign with this mega travel blitz that the campaign has, as of today, said that they're going to stop all in-person venues if they had planned to, and either cancel them outright or turn them into virtual events. It remains unclear how they're going to do that if, with this new development of the president being in Walter Reed for at least the next few days. We also know on the Biden side, we mentioned this earlier, that they've pulled negative ads. And I want to point out at the same time, our team is noting that the Trump campaign is still running attack ads on Facebook that are targeting Joe Biden right now. So I think the reality is both sides are struggling with how to do this, given the uncharted waters that we're in. And as of this morning, there were questions even about the health of the Trump family, the top tier of the Trump family, and them having to potentially be in isolation. These are the folks who are help running the campaign and even campaign staffers who had come into contact with the president as a result of that Bedminster event. So it's not just a function of can they hold these rallies for the voters and the Trump base and the supporters. It's can they actually physically do them if people who are running this campaign need to be in isolation.
Let's go back to Mary Bruce. She's in Wilmington, Delaware now with the Biden campaign. So we're seeing elements of a strategy coming together from the Biden campaign. He went forward with his event today, pulled down the negative ads. We just saw that tweet calling for unity. Are you able to pick up anything more about how they're looking at these next few days?
Well, the message coming from the Biden campaign is clearly to say that this is not political, that this is a moment for the country to try and come together and recognize that this virus is still a very real threat. That, of course, echoes the message that the Biden campaign has been making for the last several weeks, while the president and his campaign have tried to argue that the country is turning a corner, as Trump says. The Biden campaign says, no, we are very much still in the middle of this. That message, they believe, is now underscored by the fact that the president himself has now tested positive. But to the point that Cecilia was just making, regardless of which side of this campaign you're looking at, the campaign trail as we know it is now fundamentally changed with just 32 days until the election. The Trump campaign effectively screeching to a halt, the Biden campaign having to completely, or at least partially change their strategy. It is clear that they are still going to be traveling. Kamala Harris right now is heading towards an event in Las Vegas. Joe Biden just wrapping up this event in Michigan. Jill Biden was also on the road earlier today. So they are still getting out and about and talking with voters, still getting their message out. That message, though, is now being tweaked, of course, as they are ramping down their attacks and ramping up their language about the need for the country to come together.
And their message, both before and after the debate on Tuesday night, has been that they're going to go full speed ahead with the debates. They're willing to go again, despite what happened on Tuesday night. But that they're not going to go along with any change in the schedule. That's what I was told by a Biden campaign official earlier this morning. Do they expect the debates to happen?
That is such a good question right now, and simply nobody knows. I think the Biden campaign was still full steam ahead. The next face-off, of course, scheduled for just 2 weeks from now on October 15th. But the president's health and whether or not the president is able to attend safely, if he's even healthy enough, is the big X factor here. There's, of course, also the vice presidential debate, which is set to be held just next Wednesday. And while we know that the vice president, of course, has tested negative, there are questions, of course, about a need for isolation. We know that sometimes it can take several days after exposure for the virus to be detected. So whether or not we are going to see debates in the same timing that they were expected, in the same format that they were expected, are all big ifs right now, George. We simply don't know. And there are just too many X factors for either campaign, I think, to make a determination right now.
The Biden campaign and the former vice president himself have been extremely careful with COVID. As we talked about earlier, the vice president said he took 2 tests today. Should we expect that these tests are going to become relatively routine now?
Yeah, and he has been regularly tested even before this. I would suspect that they will become even more frequent. And it goes to just how different the two campaigns have been. As both of them have been ramping up their events, the president, of course, going back to those packed campaigns. He has been having a really jam-packed schedule as well. Joe Biden, even as he increases the number of events that he's been having, they are all with a very limited audience, making sure that everything complies with local guidance, the local safety precautions. He's always at a safe distance. You almost always see him wearing a mask, though sometimes he takes it off when he's actually delivering remarks. Today, you will notice he did not do that. I can tell you I've been at many of these events. I was just with him earlier this week, the day after the debate. Again, you'll often see the press sitting in those little circles 6 feet apart from each other. They take this very seriously. And even when he is not doing events, his staff is tested frequently. There's a very limited number of staffers that are allowed to have close access to the vice president. Even if they've tested negative, they're all required to wear masks. They take this virus very seriously. I suspect the strictness of their precautions is only going to increase now, George.
Right. And Cecilia Vega, at the White House, they've been somewhat more cavalier about masks on a day-to-day basis. I would expect that will change now as well.
Yeah, it's actually changing in real time, George. The pool reporters, the group of journalists who cover the president on a rotating schedule day to day, ABC is one of many outlets. The pool reporters, anyway, are reporting that the team of White House staff who are out there right now on the South Lawn waiting for President Trump to leave the residence and enter onto the helicopter Marine One are all wearing masks, including the press secretary, other staffers who are out there. It goes without saying they usually don't wear masks. And I'll repeat what we mentioned this morning on Good Morning America. It's one of the reasons, that cavalier attitude, that many news outlets, including our team at ABC, have pulled back, at least in terms of a full presence at the White House, for fear of the safety of our own team, because people were not wearing masks. We were not seeing social events happening with social distance on a regular basis. You're coming into close contact with aides and Secret Service agents on a day-to-day basis. You know this. I mentioned this earlier. The quarters inside there for the press, particularly, are not very big at all. And so there have just been a number of questions about how seriously they were taking it. And of course, it all goes back to the statements that the president himself has made from inside that press briefing room, downplaying the severity of this and even turning the issue of masks into not just a political one, but a campaign one, where he just as recently as the debate charged challenged Joe Biden and mocked him essentially for wearing a mask as often as he does. And there you go, George. You can see the
helicopter now is getting ready to go. I think that's a pretty good sign that the president will not be speaking when he makes the walk to the helicopter. It wouldn't be possible really to hear anything he would say. But we have seen more activity now around Marine One. He's in fact, now we're told he went directly to the helicopter. Our cameras were not there to see him at that moment live. So he's in the helicopter now and getting prepared to go to Walter Reed for examination, for tests over the next several days. And he will have an office set up there, as we've said, to do work and to continue to make decisions over the course of the time that he is at Walter Reed. And as Cecilia and Terry reported earlier as well, he has not invoked the 25th Amendment in any way, will not be turning over any of the powers to the vice president as he's being treated for COVID. Jen Ashton, let's remind everybody the treatment he is getting right now. He's received a single dose of Regeneron, their antibody cocktail, but also, according to the president's doctor, zinc, vitamin D, I don't even know what this is, famotidine, melatonin we all know, and a daily aspirin. Jen? I think we don't have Jen Ashton right now either. Terry Moran, it is quite a sight simply to see that helicopter waiting to take off, knowing what's happening.
It is, George. He is the president of all Americans. We are a deeply divided country right now, but that is our president, the one officer of the government elected to serve and represent all the people. Many people don't like the way he does his job. Many people find him a threat to the country that he governs. But there's no question the Constitution put him there. That's our president, and this is a very serious moment given what we know about this virus. One can only wish him well.
Marine One slowly taking off from the south lawn of the White House, the president inside. We were told by the pool he was wearing a mask as he entered, wearing a suit and a mask as he entered the helicopter. Relatively short flight to Walter Reed Medical Center, Martha Raddatz, where the president's team will already, of course, be in place, ready to give him the best care. I have to imagine, though, the president has spent time at Walter Reed visiting wounded soldiers. I have to imagine this feels like a blow, though, to him, Martha, coming in these waning days of a presidential campaign.
It has to feel like such a huge blow. And again, this is a man who is vigorous. He counts on that energy. He does not like to be seen in any way as weak. And you can see the helicopter. I think it'll be there in a matter of moments. It's in Bethesda, Maryland. And for those viewers who don't know exactly where Bethesda, Maryland is, it's very, very close to Washington, D.C., just over the border. So he should be there quite quickly. I'm sure the doctors are standing by. I'm sure they have the VIP headquarters, is what it is called there, at Walter Reed set up for the president. So if he can do work, he will do work. Again, very unusual that we haven't really heard from the president today, and so little information coming from the White House. And you have to believe that Americans right now, for the last hour and a half, have seen that helicopter sitting there with so little information about this. COVID, of course, has been the campaign issue for Joe Biden. I honestly can't imagine, George, some of these debates going forward at all, even the vice presidential debate, because as Matt and Cecilia have pointed out, it's about tone. It's about tone. And what do you say if you have a president?
It's almost impossible to imagine at this point.
It really is.
And Martha, we've seen outpourings of good wishes for the president from leaders all around the world, but also behind the scenes, I would assume at the Pentagon, some concern, will any of our adversaries try to take advantage of this moment?
You know, George, there is a minor bit of concern, but there are systems in place. They do not feel vulnerable. I've talked to some very senior military officials today who said everything is normal, everything is in place. But I will also tell you that social media has many things that are not true going on Twitter about, launching doomsday aircraft and things like that. So those rumors we certainly don't want out there because they're not true. Things are going on as normal. There are not concerns right now for national security. North Korea is not going to suddenly launch a missile or Iran try to take some move while the president is in the hospital, because these systems are in place. You can see both of those helicopters now flying very close to Walter Reed now. I would say, just judging from what I can see, the tree line there, he should be there very soon.
It is
it looks like they're just about landing there at Walter Reed, a really massive facility with some of the best doctors in the world, and he will have at his disposal, of course, any doctors he probably wants, any specialists in this. The Secret Service also, George, we have to talk about the Secret Service. They have been with him for days.
And there we see, Martha, let me interrupt you now, because there is the picture earlier of the president walking out to the helicopter wearing that mask, thumbs up from the president, his signature sign right there in a small wave.
And I suspect very much he wanted that picture, walking himself to the helicopter with those masks on, and you see all the staff around him, of course. They are protecting themselves as well, and the president, by wearing a mask, protecting them.
Jen Ashton seems to be walking relatively comfortably up those stairs as he was heading into Marine One. But as we were discussing, and we all know, some from personal experience, this can take so much out of you.
Oh, absolutely, George. Anyone who's ever had a virus with a fever, typically when you get chills in the setting of a viral syndrome, it is accompanied with a high fever. That makes people feel incredibly weak. There can definitely be changes in the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system with that. With a person who's been lying down all day suddenly has to get up and walk can be really, really difficult. It is pretty surprising that someone of this age, could handle anything like this. As I said before, I could tell you I probably wouldn't be walking if I were in that condition. It just really, really takes a lot out of you.
There again, we see the pool camera of the president walking to Marine One. Just a few moments ago, he's just about to land now at Walter Reed. John Carl now in place at Walter Reed. Can you see the helicopters?
I can see Marine One headed this way. I am right across the street from Walter Reed. Looks like he'll be landing momentarily. George, as you know, the White House, in the very little bit of information we've heard, the statement from the press secretary says that he will be here for a few days, working out of what they call the presidential offices here at Walter Reed, and I can now see the helicopter coming into view quite clearly.
And John, have you been able to get any other indication from the White House as we see the helicopters preparing to land there about what more information we will be getting from the president, his team, his doctors?
George, the thing that we have asked for repeatedly is information directly from the doctors, a briefing directly from the doctors. We have the statement that you've discussed. This is the second statement from his doctor explaining what exactly he has taken in terms of this antiviral cocktail, but very little information beyond that, really no official information beyond that. And the challenge here, George, is that as we get statements from the president's press secretary, there's just a real question about the reliability of the information, given that they have not been particularly transparent, especially on issues of the president's health, but on other issues as well, which is why the request that's being made by me and by so many other reporters is to get official information directly from the president's doctor. And here, as you can hear, the sound of Marine One, it is just about to land.
Marine One about the touchdown at Walter Reed Medical Center. President Trump is inside. As we've said, he's preparing to spend a few days, according to White House officials, to be treated for COVID-19. Melania Trump, the First Lady, of course, also tested positive. She stayed back at the White House. As John said, we have not heard beyond these paper statements from the president's doctors what more they can tell us about his condition. But we do know that they would not be taking this step if they didn't have to, if it wasn't absolutely necessary in their mind at this point for the president to be in a hospital setting, to have access to the world's best doctors and the best equipment. as we see everyone crowding around. We're not really sure what exactly we're going to be able to see of the president as he walks inside. And it brings to mind.
George, you still here?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, George, it's quite a scene here. As I mentioned to you, I'm right across the street from Walter Reed. Crowd of people across the way as word got out that the president was heading here to Walter Reed. You have people coming over to try to catch a glimpse. Obviously, the view quite blocked. But what a sight to see Marine One essentially medevacing the president of the United States here to the Walter Reed Medical Center. We saw him walk to the helicopter.